And now what we'd like to do is open it up to all of you. We have a microphone, so please wait till it gets you. We've got two on either side of the room. And we're going to, this gentleman right here has got his hand up. And speak into the microphone with your question. Please keep them as short as you can so we get lots of questions and comments. Feel free to comment as well as question.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for your presentations. My name is John Campanella. I'm currently on the Planning Commission for the city. And what I notice is we draw a lot of families downtown a couple of times a year, whether it be the Christmas parade or the Saturday parade of Fiesta. But I don't think we're family friendly on State Street once kids get beyond the carriage or the stroller. If you walk along State Street with kids who are mobile, where do you stop without spending money? Where can you rest? Where is there some open space for kids to play? Between Alameda Park and the Wharf. I think we need to take that walk. I think your committee needs family members. These millennials who have deferred family formation are starting. And if you're looking at activities or functions during the week, I think you have to consider full families being able to enjoy it to get vibrancy. And I would ask whether you're considering that, and hopefully you are. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the panel if anyone on the panel wants to take that. But one of the elements of the question is what to do with traffic and whether or not we need to create, like as I said, a third street mall, pedestrian mall, which would have family-friendly opportunities baked into it. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I'm saying that's one of the things people have suggested. Anyone on the panel want to take that comment and deal with it?
Well, since you cut all my time back, yeah, I'd like to answer. A very good point. I will say, from looking at your community downtown, you have extremely wide sidewalks. And that's good and bad. You want a little creative tension. So I think there would be opportunities to carve out, like they have in Little Italy in San Diego, corner pocket parks where people can stop and not have to spend money. I always used to judge success in Palm Springs by whether I was balancing baby carriages with stretch limos. And I think you got to get both. But the idea of of downtown malls, open malls, I'm not a big fan of, but I knew they work in some places. You essentially have that. You know, if you could actually do an event center and spaces in the downtown in the right-of-way rather than use cars, have an auto-free zone like they do in Europe. A lot of the communities, towns in Europe have gone to that, to purely pedestrian zones. It's a matter of moving traffic around, but I think you have a lot of opportunities downtown to create those kinds of public spaces. There's no big downtown park on State Street. I think that's missing. It's going to be hard to do, but I agree with you.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. I'm a mom, and I agree that that's a really important point, that we want to bring everyone downtown, including families, is really key. So I'm glad you brought that up. We want to add that to the task force for sure.
You know, there are a lot of ways in which we draw people downtown for other reasons. You have the red tile tour, if you want to take the historic tour. We should probably have the children's tour, so that if you want to go from anywhere from Kids World to Moxie and everything in between, you got a map that shows you where all the different things are. But one of the ways you could certainly do it would be to have a different kind of festival going on, you know, multiple different times during the week. And one of those could be a kids festival, so that on, you know, Wednesday nights it's kids night downtown. You have kids movies at the movies, you have kids food on State Street, you have kids activities. You close the street and you make it into a giant kids fair.
Absolutely.
I want to address something you said, and I think this is something that
Was that to Jerry?
Yes, this gentleman here from Palm Springs.
Yeah.
Huge demographic that you haven't mentioned in Palm Springs, and I'll have to come out, and that's the gay community.
Yes, sir.
And the reason I bring this up is because I'm a part of I'm a part of a club called Great Outdoors, which has been a club for over 30 years. And there used to be 30 chapters. We're down to 5 chapters, basically all over Southern California. The fastest growing, most healthy chapter is the Palm Springs chapter. Part of the reason is that the gay community, especially my generation, who are retiring and have fixed incomes, they are retiring to Palm Springs because that's like a safe place for them to be. Right. So the thing I say about that is one of the disadvantages that Santa Barbara has that you don't have is we really can't expand out. We have the Pacific Ocean, we have the mountains, you have Gaviota, and you have Montecito. So we're pretty sandwiched in here regarding housing. And one of the things I see for my own situation, I live in Lompoc. And I choose to live in Lompoc because I can afford something there far better than here. And I think the conversation for Santa Barbara, and you actually brought this up, which I think is a really good point, it's got to be a county-wide situation or conversation in terms of housing. Because I do know in Lompoc, they don't have a housing crisis. In fact, they're downtown, they're begging people to rent their retail space down there. So there's something missing in terms of why Lompoc has no housing crisis, but we have one here, and it's obviously because of supply and demand. People want to live here. But it would be great, like in my case, and I know they've started a rail service from Oxnard up here, that somehow I can hop on a train, come down to Santa Barbara, and then hop on it and come back to Lompoc, so I don't have to drive that commute. And I think that's really important, and I think that has to be included as to the rapid transit so that people can come into this community on a rapid transit basis that's accessible, consistent, and easy, because Santa Barbara is stuck. It's more like, and there was a gentleman in another meeting that compared us to a town in Washington State, but if I was to compare Santa Barbara to a similar situation, it's Venice, Italy. Yep. It's a historically attractive town, and it's completely sandwiched in by the ocean. Right. So that's the kind of thing I would think I'd like to see more talked about.
I'm going to turn it over to the panel, but just so everybody knows that Judy mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to do another set of these meetings on transportation, because we all know this is a huge issue. Thanks for bringing it up. And it's not just 101. It's not just that we added one new train between Ventura and Santa Barbara. It's our commuters, 15,000 people a day commute here because they can't afford to live here, and it doesn't go to Lompoc as frequently. Why doesn't it? So we're going to tackle that, and I'm not going to ask this panel to deal with the transportation issue just yet, other than as it might relate to State Street, meaning electric buses as opposed to cars. But we will be doing that, and we see that as a huge problem as well as housing. Jerry.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. Thank you for bringing that up. That's something I feel good about. Actually, the gay population in Palm Springs has been a large reason for the resurgence. And I kind of skipped the middle part. I live downtown, and 40% of my neighbors are gay, and it's a great community. We have the majority of our council is now gay. Planning commission, staff, the leading, really most valued and creative people of the community are gay. And we had a gay mayor, I think that you met, and he was black, gay, and he was on Saturdays, he was a preacher. Now you talk about a minority. Was he Republican? No. That would have been impossible. Anyway.
That's a bridge too far.
But where he got me past this, because I'm from the Midwest, and homeless people kind of freak me out, and gays freak, minorities. Anyway, he was a big supporter, and Ron would sit down and we'd say, Jerry, we need to talk about the creative class, whether they're gay, straight, whatever. It's the creative class, and that's what millennials are now bringing. It's that creative class, and millennials are a fruition of that. So I appreciate you bringing it up. Very important.
Anyone else from the panel want to comment? Or okay, next one over here, please.
Hi, yeah, talking about millennials. I hope that the task force takes in mind, like looking around the room, there's not a lot of millennial representation here tonight. And a lot of these conversations, a lot of these ideas, I know a lot of the activists and organizers that I talk to on a regular basis have a lot of ideas, but unfortunately we don't have the capital or resources to make them come to fruition. But I'd also like to get the panel's thoughts on looking towards the future, the role of government to be able to be more nimble, especially hearing all the information that HELP provides, that this is a cyclical change that happens. The economy is going to shift. And how do we institutionalize the ability to quickly pivot when these issues arise?
I can just tell you from my experience in government, I used to think that was possible, and now I think it's almost impossible. In fact, I think it's getting worse. But I think the good news is that it's possible to do it outside of government, and the government will choose to be a partner to help make it happen. It's just hard in the institution of government to be nimble. But everybody I know, certainly on this city council and the councils before it, are actually quite open to wanting to do the right thing, but they're looking for leadership that is not necessarily in their midst. And I think that's where you've got to come together as a community and government to make it happen. You don't want to just look to the Chamber of Commerce, and you don't want to just look to the City Council. You really have to look to a congregate of a whole group of people that come together to want to make it happen. That's where it'll be nimble.
Yeah, and I would say we definitely are aware that we want a millennial voice on the task force. That's really important to us. We've already talked about it and have some people in mind. And it's interesting because I just met Jerry and he was talking about Village Fest and what impact that made. And we were talking about making downtown vibrant for locals and young people and everyone. And I've heard a lot about we should just do an ad campaign and tell locals to come downtown, which just irritates me to no end, because what we should do is make downtown exciting and then you want to go downtown, right? So that was the chicken before the egg. And then I just happened to have someone come into my store today, and she's back here tonight, Lindsay. She has actually just told me today that they're taking over Macy's and doing a State Street night market every evening starting on Black Friday with a curated arts market in the evening in that Macy's space with all sorts of crafts and things that Jerry was just talking about to me yesterday. So I know that the millennials are where it's at, and just connected with Lindsay today. So we absolutely have that, and I'd love to hear more from you on that as well.
Over this side, do you have it over on that side of the room?
Yeah.
Please.
I have a quick thing to just throw in the conversation here, Ronaldo. Art Ludwig and Oasis Design is working on what he's calling sexy affordable housing. And the concept sounds like a counterintuitive, but it's really cool design, integrating more communal living, and something that millennials, at least I would be interested in as a millennial. I just want to put that in the conversation.
Hi, my name is Nina Dunbar. I'm representing Santa Barbara Beautiful tonight. We're a nonprofit organization that invests in the aesthetics of the community. And my question is to Jerry, but it was inspired a little bit by Hal. Santa Barbara recently helped the city fund a temporary sculpture exhibit on State Street. It was the first time in 10 years that State Street had any temporary sculpture. But we were the primary funders of that. And I passionately believe in the creative class and the necessity of keeping them housed here and keeping them with jobs here. So my question is about government's role in incentivizing arts-based businesses. Just as Hal talked about government taking the lead in incentivizing other businesses, in Palm Springs and other cities, what kind of investment should government make in leading arts investments in the city, or should it at all?
Well, it was easy for Palm Springs. They didn't have any money. So basically, we have the Palm Springs Art Museum, which is really a non-retail anchor in downtown. What we sponsor, we did have a public arts commission. We did have a public arts and public places program. We encouraged artists. We developed pad sites. And that's one thing I missed in downtown. I didn't see much art here.
Santa Barbara funded the pads, but that's a private nonprofit.
Yeah, but we have had, the city didn't have the money, but we let the word be out that we wanted to create a downtown art walk, an outdoor gallery, and gallery owners stepped up and donated pieces. And we plaqued them with a name and so on. We didn't raise money. And one of the things I did work very much with is lower and middle range art galleries to open up. That was one of the first groups of people that would fill vacancies. And Village Fest was a huge attraction for them. And I would say parenthetically that when we were having difficulty, when we opened Village Fest and it went to half a mile long, the brokers, the realtors will all come in and say, we want a site in Village Fest. We want a retail shop right in the middle of Village. That's the only action. Art stores fill a large part of that market, and many of them are gone, but they stayed. They converted into a higher, more revenue-generating business. But the arts community is very, very important. The city just didn't have the money to actually go out and commission works, but we got there.
Anyone else on
And
the panel?
you have a lot of gallery. You have a lot of museums and so on here that could get involved in, I would think.
Hal?
I would just say, stepping back in time, an economic development plan that the city developed in the 80s, which got to Paseo Nuevo, included a business plan and an arts plan integrated together. Everything was built around the arts as the key economic developer for the city of Santa Barbara. In fact, when Paseo Nuevo was built, it had to be built around the concept of a movie theater, center stage theater, and the Contemporary Arts Forum as the core center of it. When we built the cultural district on Upper State Street, it was to bring restaurants up there, but it was built around theaters. When we were building Old Town, the restoration of Old Town, it was built around the idea of street fairs on the street. We even raised the bed tax, 2 of the whatever percentage is today, but 2 of those percentages were put in strictly to support the arts, to support the business community downtown. Now, over time, it gets filtered away into other things, but one of the things that it even included was for 10 years, every year there would be $50,000 in the arts fund just to try out a new idea. Didn't make any difference whether it succeeded or not. One of them was going to make it work. We had a jazz festival. We had the Civic Light Opera. We had a food festival with key people from restaurateurs from around the world. The one that did work, we started with $10,000, was the Santa Barbara International Film Festival in 1985. And I think that you can make those kind of investments, but putting it in the economic development plan was key to making it happen.
Dan?
Yes.
Wait.
So we've heard here that the city and other political entities have been helpful in the past, but now my guess is if most people think about the city's role in developing the downtown, it would be seen more as an impediment and a blocker. Therefore, wouldn't it make sense to get a couple of impressive city people on the task force so that they can be seen as, and indeed get motivated to be part of the solution?
By city people, do you mean city employees? Or do you
City
mean,
employees,
okay.
if not elected politicians. I don't know about that, but at least, no, I didn't
You
mean
know,
anything negative by that.
We
But
had the
it's-
same problem. That's not unique to this town. And when we set up Main Street, we had city representatives. The planning director was in all our meetings, the director of economic development, the parks director, and they became actively involved in the dialogue. They could talk once a month with downtown property owners. They became leaders in this process. It took a while, but they got up there.
We did have an experience here a little while ago. There was a charrette, a bunch of architects in the town came together about 3 or 4 months ago under the leadership of Brian Cornell. And they put together some very interesting ideas of the downtown area, including a lot of green space, which we were talking about. And that was presented to the city council, and the reaction was, well, we don't have any money, go away. So that cannot be the reaction of the ideas from this task force. So, bring them into the system so that they feel like they're part of the solution.
In the system or not, and that's hopefully they'll want to be part of it, this is going to happen because the public will is so strong for a solution. I think it's going to happen. The question is how can we optimize the combination of things we do? And so hopefully, and does anybody in the panel want to add to that thought or?
I feel like we are already talking to them and they are involved. I mean, I'm not going to name them, but yeah, they are involved in the task force and in conversations with me personally. And so it's just, but it is a matter, I think, as Ronaldo is pointing out, is that what we're trying to do is come up with a community-based, business-based, private sector plan. But yes, with the city's involvement, and then get the city to act. So it's both things that you're saying.
And the only reason I'm making that point, Dan, is because we don't want to wait for somebody to say, well, if a city leader isn't on board or if a city planner's not on board, gee, I guess we got to hold off and do it. So this is an initiative which I think is going to bring the city leadership, meaning elected leadership. I think it's going to bring city planning directing in. I think it's going to bring in the private sector because it's going to take all of us. That's the whole point of the task force, is to bring everybody in. So I'm glad to hear what Amy was saying. Over on this side of the room, next question over there. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to something that Jerry said. 15 to 20 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Richard Florida wrote a book called Creative Communities, and it does an excellent job of documenting the economic validity and stimulus of the creative arts. And I think chapter 3 in that book is entitled Why Cities Without a Gay Community Are Doomed.
That sounded like a comment more than a question, but does anybody in the panel want to respond to that comment?
I don't know about that, but I
Okay,
think when
so-
you're talking about community arts, theater,
that's
fine arts, and so on, the gay community is very important and has a big role. Yeah.
The mic's right behind you.
Please.
Wesley Rose, Santa Barbara Permaculture Network. We have a huge economy, the nonprofit economy. We call it the third economy. We're very vibrant and alive in the city, and we make a lot of programs and education for our community that moves things forward. But we have a real big roadblock right now, is that the library, when we started running programs in 2003, 2004, was a very affordable place, and it was booked every evening. There was always, when the library closed, there was something going on, music, film. Now, we've all been pushed out of the library. It's too expensive and too restrictive. And so we have been pushed out, which is like, we're like one of the last hold-ons that ran events a lot, and we can't afford to run stuff. And I've talked to the library board a number of times, and we've just been stonewalled. So I would like to see if the library would be included in it, because it's an incredible resource and it isn't being used. If you go to the library right now and look at what's booked in the evening, nothing. And it used to be, we couldn't get a spot for 2 months. And we used to think that was so good. So anyway, I'll bring that up because I think that's and we used to bring sometimes 150, 200 people to an event that would then go out downtown. Now it's not happening.
Yeah, and panel, I'd like you to broaden that comment to not just the fee-based comment you're making about with the library, but the broader question of when the city charges fees, does it depress activity? Can they make it back without charging those fees with higher retail taxes and whatever? Does anybody want to, on the panel, comment on that, whether it's the library or the broader question?
Well, the best form of flattery is imitation. And I think the best form of imitation is to look to the places that are successful. And if you look around the country, whether it's Faneuil Hall in Boston or Horton Plaza in San Diego or downtown San Francisco, is that there's a plan for how you invest bringing human and financial resources to each of these activities. It doesn't just happen by happenstance, and it doesn't cost the property owner something to make it happen. It's part of the investment of creating what I would call the infrastructure of the spirit. It really is. If you're going to create the infrastructure of the roads, you don't think about how much it's going to cost. You're just going to make it happen. But the infrastructure of the spirit is all of this activity that occurs around the downtown or in other parts of the community that you have to invest in. And you don't just expect, oh, that's an extra that somebody ought to pay for. That's just part of the bloodstream of any body. You can't say, well, yeah, you got a great body, but we're going to charge you for blood. That's just the core of what makes it work. The core of what makes Santa Barbara work is this infrastructure of the spirit, the arts, the paseos, the ability to bring children downtown, the ability to have parades and events. The solstice last weekend was fantastic. Just, you want that kind of vibrancy and life downtown, and that you don't charge for.
I'd just like to add, I know I'm talking too much, but...
No, you're not, Jerry.
Okay. Do I have another 20 minutes? No. As an observer, I've watched your community over the decades since being here, and have always admired this community. You have a perfect situation here. I've traveled cities of the world. I've looked at Florence is my favorite. Paris, okay, it's just a little too big. But you can draw influences, and I look, you have a perfect situation, and the climate you can't beat. I know I'm not sitting in 107 degrees, and I don't miss it, but you can't beat it. You have a beautiful community. The infrastructure is here. You need to energize it. What I see is when I walk down State Street, I do pedestrian, not counts, but estimates, and I'd say the days I've been here, including today, which is Thursday and is closing in on the weekend, the stretch I saw on Santa Barbara is about half the pedestrian traffic, to maybe a third to a half of what I would expect to see in Palm Springs. You need energy, and that's what Village Fest and those kind of events bring. Village Fest pays for itself. Doesn't cost the city a dime. It's all off of fees, and you can't beat it. So.
Over on this side of the room, and you're next. This gentleman. Oh, good.
A subject that hasn't come up is that roughly 30% of our population is Hispanic. It's got to be a factor that needs to be recognized and blended into all of this.
Agreed.
I agreed. I mean, that's, it's got to be, it's a multiracial thing. I mean, we have a small black community in Palm Springs, but they're involved. We have a Native American community in Palm Springs, and they're key to our future, believe me. And the Latino population, absolutely. There's more creative people in that community than there are a lot of others.
Good evening. I'm Tina Takaya, owner of Opal Restaurant and Bar, and I'm currently building 2 more restaurants where the old El Torito building is. And I love all the ideas that everybody's talking about. I think it's great, really creative. But I feel like it's, like Amy was saying, it's the chicken before the egg. And we have to fill the businesses down there. We have to attract people to come to downtown to do businesses. And I've been in this town since 1970, and I've talked to hundreds of people just recently about why it is, what's the problems. And I think we have to get back down to the foundation of what our city is and how, I always look at what we want to create and then go down from that. Like, why can't we create that? Why can't we do that? Why can't we do that? And right now, the businesses, I've talked to people who've wanted to come to Santa Barbara, but they found out it takes 2 years to do a business, to create a business and to get into a business. They don't have the money, the time, or the energy. So I agree with what's been said about involving our government, involving our city council, involving everybody to get things changed at a level which is inviting people to come here, which is making our permitting process easier, making it about the guidelines, not opinions. Right. And I think that that's a huge important part about us coming together as a community, but also as a business community, as residents, to make, I've done my home as well, and I came across some interesting issues with that as well. And I think that it's not as inviting. So how do you do all the fun things? You have to create the businesses to make it really vibrant and exciting and then I don't really like to say homeless, because I think there's facilities for homeless, but I think a lot of them are aggressive panhandlers and mentally ill, and we have to have facilities for them, and we have to help them. But I think if we're really vibrant downtown, then it's not so easy to sit in front of an empty storefront or sleep in front of an empty storefront, because there'd be vibrancy around. And so therefore, they'll be sort of pushed into getting help, or we'll be able to help them a little bit easier than that, because it's not so easy to lay around. So.
I'd like to address that.
You're hired.
Yeah, right. I agree with all. The permitting process, that was one of the main challenges of the Downtown Development Center. My job as a designer, planner background, I knew almost as much, I think, maybe a little more than the staff in certain cases. I don't mean to be braggadocio, but I certainly had more experience than most of them. And my job was to shorten that cycle. I would meet with a property owner. I'd meet with the architects. I would help say, this is going to sell. I was their advocate when we went to Planning Commission, we went to Design Review, and we went to City Council. My job is to shorten that review time, and that's a big deal. It really is.
You know, and I don't want to escape notice of this, and we've got time for just a couple more questions, and then we're going to break up at 7:30, as we said we would. However, most of the panelists are willing to stick around for private conversations and comments, so please don't think you have to leave, but if those who want to leave can. But it's really important what Jerry said. You know, the city paid Jerry for 15 years. There was somebody charged with the responsibility to do all this stuff. And that's something also that the task force is going to have to look at. Can we do this on just volunteer labor, or do we have to like put some, you know, pedal to the metal, so to speak? So that's another thing I just want to touch on. Now we've got all the issues on the table. There's someone over here with the microphone.
Wait, can I say one more thing, though, about what Tina said? Is that in the city's defense, I think that our city was successful and profitable and full of people and retail. Everybody wanted to be on State Street. And I think that we have new leadership, we have a new mayor, and we have this amazing opportunity. So I think this crisis really is an opportunity, because all the things that we've identified, people do want to change, including the government. So I think we're all on the same team, and we're now focused on the solutions and what we can do instead of focus on the problems. So I think this is the perfect time to be coming together.
Hello, I'm curious to hear more from Jerry about the Palm Springs model and what role any amount of new housing played in the rebirth of the Palm Springs downtown area.
New housing? Yeah, not enough. I live in downtown, but it's in a gated community tennis club. There is a lot of existing housing right around the Palm Canyon, Indian Canyon commercial corridor. We've done some attempts to build single occupancy SRO housing. There are some mixed use developments on the drawing boards now. That's kind of our last piece. We have a lot of people that live within walking distance of downtown, a lot like me, that the housing stock was there. It's been there. It's getting a little tired. But a lot of us, we walk, my wife and I and our beagle, Sherlock, every hour, every day, we take 45 minutes and we walk Palm Canyon Drive. And a lot of people do that. You need to have housing so people, downtown is everybody's neighborhood. Ever hear that before? Well, that's what it's got to be. You got to have people living there, I think it was pointed out. Eyes on the street 24/7. And that's what you really have a tremendous infrastructure here, and housing it's all about greed. It's all about price. And we got to get to the point where, because that you have enough retail space to support, I know why you don't have a high occupancy rate. You just don't have the energy here. And people that live downtown bring energy, really.
Just a couple of comments, if I may. From a professional point of view anyway, there's no shortage of potential solutions, and everybody has a great idea. The biggest problem is that there's no one-size-fits-all. And Santa Barbara is a unique community. I've only been here for 6 years, a little more than that. And I know of no place where you have both a city and a huge influx of tourism at the same time. It mixes quite well. The biggest argument I've heard amongst the people I've spoken with is, are we trying to satisfy the residents, or are we trying to speak to the tourists? Because there's both a business issue involved and there's also a community issue involved. So from my point of view, what I do is design cultural attractions, museums and other things like that. And they always involve the community, not just one facility. For example, the idea of using a cultural attraction to be the anchor for a mall instead of a department store. I think the key phrase that I would recommend to the panel to consider is the ever popular idea that coming to Santa Barbara is an experience. And an experience can be retail, an experience can be cultural, an experience can be walking down a street. And Mr. Caruso has proven to us in his malls that if you have music and light, not just light, but sound, it deflects a lot of the sounds of motorized traffic, whether you have a mall or where people are driving on State Street. So I think the thing, for me anyway, in the planning process is to understand the underpinnings of the problem before coming up with the brilliant solution. Hopefully you have both. But I would just commend the panel to that approach.
Comments, or should we go to the next question, panel? Thank you very much for that contribution. It's interesting, when Walt Disney built Disneyland, the first thing he did is he put sound speakers in all the light poles. Yeah. On this side of the room? Okay, sure, go ahead.
I just wanted to suggest that we have, so I'm from Santa Barbara Permaculture Network also, so an environmental influence, and we have 3 major festivals here already, and a couple of years ago I suggested to the CEC, who we do programs with, that how about bringing that festival back to State Street like we did, it had its origins there. And the reason I say that is because our 3 major festivals, Solstice, Earth Day, and the third one, there's another very large, well, Fiesta, yes, but there's one other. If we could have those take place on State Street, and it would have to have the retailers thinking that that was a good idea. But when I noticed the car festival that takes place from Mitchell to Rena all the way down to the sea, it's all families walking up and down, even if they have no interest in cars whatsoever, including myself. I found it so pleasurable just to walk up and down State Street. What happens with Earth Day and Solstice is that huge crowd that visits now goes to a residential park, which is wonderful. Alameda Park is so suited for that, but it's a residential neighborhood. The parking's residential. It takes all of that energy and tourists away from your downtown core. And so with Earth Day, for instance, with California needing to come up to some of the standards with the climate issues, all of that, I thought if we had something that had the tourists unintentionally ending up being a part of it, and something that said, California's smart. You know, where are we all going to go with all these new emerging mandates from the California that we're all going to have to come up to? But the main idea is with some of those festivals, even when we held them at the Sunken Garden, which is not large enough, I know the restraints, but it kept things closer to the downtown core instead of drawing 100,000, 80,000 people away from downtown.
Thank you. Panel, anyone want to? Okay, so we have time for one more question. As again, this last question we'll take from this side of the room over here, and if we have, please. And if you want to stick around afterwards, I'm going to do an interview, so I probably won't be available, but other people on the panel will be. And take one thought, if nothing else, from tonight. Notice that everybody in this room has some idea of what might work. And I found that the only thing different between people who have some idea of what might work and people who get things to actually work is they choose to engage. So don't leave it up to the task force, be on the task force, apply to join it if you want, but know that what you bring to it, more than your questions, your comments tonight, bring yourself to the solution, and the solution will reveal itself. With that, we'll take one more question formally. This lady right here in the 4th row up. Do you? I don't believe I knew mine. Yes, you do. You do, please.
I was just going to ask about housing right on State Street. And it's come up in the last couple comments and questions. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it seems to me that from what I've heard from people who have addressed the problem, that there are a lot of restrictions, there are a lot of problems. I'm not a developer. I live in the city, but I don't live within comfortable walking distance at night, and that's a problem. I would consider moving to State Street from my home, which is up by the bowl, so that I could walk with my dog and go to dinner and not have to drive at night at this point in my life, if there was more housing on State Street. And when I look at particularly like the area around the Granada and what you might call the cultural district or the theater district, and I see that there are a lot of different buildings that have different levels. So, you know, you've got the Granada that's a pretty tall building, and then you have some restaurant or storefronts that are just 1 story high, and then you have others that are 2 or 3 story high. I'm wondering wondering why we can't be creative and like put some interesting loft or penthouse kind of apartments down there. I know a lot of people who have lived for a long time in very large houses in Montecito, who, given the tragedy of what's happened in that community over the past 6 months, are looking for other options, you know, in terms of a way to live. And maybe, you know, out of that tragedy, we can continue to revitalize the city. There are people who wouldn't come down to State Street who ended up in hotels downtown and saw the potential. So I just think if we can capitalize on that sort of curiosity and interest and really get creative about how we address this. We do need affordable housing for millennials, for people who work in town, for our service workers, for our for people who don't have a car, but they don't all necessarily have to live on the exact same street. You know, I mean, we can spread out, but I just think that if we could get creative right on that central corridor and really maximize that's the way I think we're going to get people, you know, to really.
Yeah, that's been a part of every discussion I've been in for over a year. So I absolutely think that's going to happen, and I've heard that's what's happening with Macy's on the upper floors. So yeah, it's going to be not on the street level, but the next levels up. That's absolutely in the works as far as I'm concerned, and from what I've heard. And yeah, the mayor is nodding, so that's a good sign. Yeah, I agree. We all agree.
I think if you interviewed millennials, and I'm not one, but I would live on State Street above a shop. That's my dream.
I'm not one either, and I go.
But I think if you interviewed millennials, you'd find that that's really where they want to be.
A final comment from a panelist before we close it officially?
Just say that, you know, the Granada Theater project worked because they condominiumized the Granada building to make certain things happen there. There's no reason why a lot of places where you have single-story buildings on State Street, you can't create a condominium situation with somebody else building and owning the property above the one that's on the main street. So there's a lot of ways you can make that happen.
Ron, you've been quiet over there. Do you want to just say a few words as we close off?
Well, I just noticed that in all of the speakers and all of the questions, the majority of the words that came out were government and plan. And I think that's the area that we're going to have to work on for the future. The government taking more responsibility for things that they have purview over, and we and the merchants downtown have to have a plan as to where they want to go and what they want to do.
Ron, Hal, Amy, and Jerry, prematurely gray millennial that he is, thank you all for joining us tonight. Please stick around and ask more questions if you like.